Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this session, I'd like to share with you some thoughts on a game played by former world champion Anatoly Karpov against Grandmaster Andrei Sokolov. The game was played in 1987. And this game reminded me of an interview I recently read that was made with Anatoly Karpov when he was asked about his strengths and weaknesses in chess. And he pointed out that he felt that he never liked studying openings and it was never his strengths. On the other hand, he was extremely strong in defending positions that others would give up on or even resign. And while, of course, in this particular game, he was in no danger of resigning, really, or losing the game, but he certainly had to be on the defensive at times. And that's one of the challenging parts about chess, when you have to face the opponent's attack. And many of us don't like that. We prefer to be on the attack and give checkmates, obviously. That's why we all play chess. We all want to give checkmate at the end of the day. However, as you keep improving, you will face more and more resistance, and it's going to be harder and harder. And unavoidably, you will face situations that you will have to be on the defense, and your opponent will attack your king. And the important thing to understand is that that's not a problem in itself. If they attack you and you can defend, that's just fine. That's just part of the game. And to do it well can lead you very far ahead. As Karpov said, he attributes his success that he was a much more patient and better defender than most of his peers in his era. Okay, well, after all this introduction, let's get started and see the actual game I'm talking about. Karpov had the black pieces, which to some degree automatically defines that you're on the defensive, as white is the one starting the game first. e4, c6, Caro-Kann, and white played c4, a relatively rare continuation compared to the most common d4 move. And black plays d5, as he would pretty much on any white second move in this opening. White captured on d5. Black captured back, and white captured on d5. In this position, black could capture back immediately on d5. However, that would allow white to gain a tempo and attack the queen right away with knight c3. And Karpov chose to avoid that and rather develop his kingside knight immediately and hope to capture back on d5 with the knight, which is, of course, right away an ideal position for the knight, occupying that blockading square outpost right in front of white's isolated d-pawn. And here it's a crossroad. White can choose to go in two directions. One is to give a check with the bishop on b5 to try to cause some kind of a blockade in front of the d-pawn and try to hang on to that extra pawn that white has, or to forget about it and just continue developing, which white did in this game. I really don't plan to spend too much time in the opening phases of the game. You can always do that with the help of a software or one of the excellent opening books written on the Caro-Kann defense. I'm trying to more focus in this session on the attack-defense aspect of this game. Knight captured on d5, and white continues developing, knight f3. And this is another interesting moment where black in most games continues by playing e6 or knight c6, which typically just transposes to a regular Panov variation of the Caro-Kann. But Karpov chose something different in this game and immediately captured white's knight on c3, and therefore changing the character of the position. White no longer has the isolated pawn, but will have the so-called hanging pawns when both of the white pawns are on half-open files in the potential fire and being the potential target of the black pieces. And black continued by playing g6. So now the game gets interesting. Black just obviously wants to play bishop g7 and castle, and then ideally pile up the rooks on the c and d files, targeting white's c and d pawns with the help of the other minor pieces and the queen. So that's Black's game plan, and White can here simply accept that fact and play d4, which most people do, or play more ambitiously and play h4. Go for a kill, try to scare Black from castling on the king side, and that's what Black had to face in this game. So some players I know, especially on club level, they immediately got worried, oh my god, my opponent is attacking. And I'd like to calm those players down that would feel that way, that yes, it's true, White is attacking. It doesn't mean that this attack has to succeed. In fact, knowing the fact that Black haven't made a mistake yet in the game, there is no justification why this attack should succeed. So therefore, we can look at it the other way, that White made a very risky move. Because after this move, White's castling will be in great jeopardy. Castling to the queen side is not really guaranteeing safety for the king, with the b file already being open and the b2 pawn missing. And now that White played h4, similar ideas come across our minds, castling to the king side. So reality is that while this is certainly an interesting move, or maybe even a challenging move for Black to face, it's not something for Black to worry about. Whenever White plays h4 in similar situations, you can have usually three types of reactions. One is to immediately play h5 and simply blockade the advance of the white pawn to h5 or further. A second one is to play h6. So after White's h5 push, you can play g5. Or the third one is to simply ignore it and do what you plan to do before. This is a very typical, for example, for a Sicilian dragon type of positions. And that answer would be really varying from the exact position each time. In some games prior to the one played by Karpov, Black experimented by playing h6 in some games, but White had some initiative after playing queen a4 check immediately. And then if, for example, knight d7, White could even play queen d4, disrupting the normal development of the black pieces on the king side. Also, White may simply choose to play h5 immediately and then play d4 and put a bishop on d3 and try to create an attack along the weakened light squares in Black's position. So going back to the game, Karpov decided to simply play bishop g7 and ignore the attack that White started. White naturally continued with h5, and again Black didn't need to react to it and just played knight c6. If right now White captures on g6 and then trades rooks on h8, it's true that Black can no longer castle on the king side, but neither can White. And that's about it. It's not the end of the world. Black can still castle on the queen side, and probably the Black king will be still in a lot safer position there than White's king will be wherever it goes. Let's go back again. And after knight c6, White did not rush with that trade. White could push the pawn ahead also, but that doesn't give anything significant for White either. So after knight c6, White continued in the game by playing rook b1, a somewhat logical move, putting the rook on the half-open file and trying to prevent the normal development of the black bishop from c8, which is guarding the pawn on b7 at the moment. Now, this is one of those moments when castling would be, so to say, castling into it. when white could play queen a4, whether immediately or after the exchange of pawns on g6, and then swing the queen over to h4 after the opening of the h-file, indeed could be a quite dangerous threat for black to face. However, nobody said that black needs to castle right at this moment. And black didn't, but played queen c7, just calmly, protecting that pawn on b7 and liberating the bishop from c8. At this moment, white should continue with d4 and get his bishops out and kind of play in that direction, but instead white chose to play bishop a3, and that's a move in the wrong direction. Black now can develop his bishop, and he did. Played bishop f5, attacking the rook. Now white cannot block this attack with the pawn to d3, because then the pawn on c3 would be hanging. On the other hand, it's not so easy to find a real ideal square for this rook. It kind of, anywhere it goes, it looks misplaced. The game continued with rook b5, and black chased the rook further by playing a6, and the rook moved to c5. I have to say, when a rook in a normal position with still almost all the pieces on the board, being a place like c5 on the 5th rank is really, really awkward and very rarely works. Most often it would be trapped or would cause other kind of trouble. Now the only good thing about white's last move is that the knight is pinned now on c6, and therefore black moved. Now on one hand the knight is free now to move, and on the other hand black put more pressure on the d3 square, and ideally black would want to put a bishop or knight on that square. White continued with queen b3, which kind of prevents black from castling to the queen side, because then the f7 pawn would be unprotected. But now that black pretty much developed and the white queen is not on a4, black was ready to castle to the king side. What black had to keep in mind here is to make sure that white cannot easily and quickly swing the queen over to the h-file. H takes, H takes. It's true that the h-file is open, but as I mentioned, it's very, very hard to get the white queen over to h4, and even then it doesn't necessarily mean that it's game over. Even if the white queen could move over to h4 right now in one move, the black rook from f8 could move away, and after the check on h7 the king can walk to f8, and it's still not simple to see how white could make progress. In those type of situations, when the queen can get to h7 and the king needs to move over to f8, what white ideally should be able to do is to get a bishop to h6. But as you can see, now the white bishop has already moved in a whole other direction and is not anywhere close in getting to h6. White continued by playing bishop c4 right now, developing the bishop. And here black has several good ways to go. One is the way world champion Karpov did with bishop f6. Also to consider was to play b5 right now, attacking the bishop. And just to show you an interesting variation, if bishop d5, then knight a5, queen b4, knight b7. And now the best white can do is trade on b7. The idea that was suggested in one of the commentaries to this game, which was knight g5, knight takes e5, and now to play rook h8, hoping to force the king to h8 and then checkmate with queen h4, or even after bishop takes to play queen h4, doesn't really work, because black can simply play king g7 and maintain a winning position. Let's go back. After bishop c4 in the actual game, Karpov continued by playing bishop to f6. Now this prevents white kind of forever to get a queen to h4, and also it has the idea of playing king g7 followed by rook h8 and then take over the control of the h file. White continued with d4, and now Karpov played the very natural move b5. Looking at the game with the help of some computer analysis, it's also interesting to point out that black could have played b6 with the idea to open up the b file and then try to get a skewer on the first rank after queen c6 and rook b1 that would give black some material advantage. I would say it's kind of a matter of taste because Karpov also got a significant advantage in the game, but I'm sure there will be people choosing this route as well. After d4, let's see how the game continued, where Karpov played b5, bishop d5, and knight a5, queen retreated to d1, and knight b7, kind of the same plan we were discussing earlier. Now, if white would try to go for the kill and sacrifice the rook, it would not work, because after knight takes and queen h6, the knight escapes with a check, and then after king moves out, black can stop any kind of threats of queen h7 by simply moving the g pawn up, and while it looks a bit scary, there is really nothing white can do to improve the position or bring new resources to the attack. After knight b7, the relatively best choice was to capture on b7, but even the position after the trade on that square, black would have a significant advantage, having the two bishops, white's attack being completely gone, and the white king is the one actually not having a safe position. In the meantime, the rook on c5 is still misplaced, and when the right moment comes, black can just play, for example, moves like e6, bishop e7, and try to trap that rook that still is in the picture. In the game, white thought that he found a very interesting idea and go for the attack, and played knight e5, attacking black's queen. Bishop captured, and white sacrificed the rook by capturing back. If right now white instead would capture on b7, then after queen b7 and when white captures on e5, white's g2 pawn would be hanging, which of course would be still a better route to go than what white did. Pawn captured, knight captured. Now white cannot just capture the knight on c5, because then after rook a to d8, black's advantage would be obvious. White played queen d4. I bet that's what white was hoping for, that now black would be helpless against the queen swinging over to h4. The problem for black is that he cannot just play king g7 and then meet queen h4 with rook h8, because that would put the king into the discovery and e6 would come. Neither could black play g5, preventing the queen to get to h4, or rather check first, making sure the knight is not hanging, king f1 and then g5, because then the white rook would all of a sudden sacrifice itself on h8, forcing the black king onto the same diagonal with the black king, and discover check with e6 again wins the black queen. Probably what white overlooked is the defensive move, the only move, by the way, that saves the game here, that black prepared. Try to think and figure out what is that correct defensive move for black in this position. And that is queen a7, only move to save the game. Now, if the queen moves to h4, luckily for black, he has sufficient material advantage to give some of it back, and then just queen f2, and then black would be still an exchange and the pawn up after the exchanges on f2. Now white is completely lost. The game continued with bishop e7, and now black has a number of choices to win. Karpov chose to trade queens and then play knight f4. Now black is up a whole rook, but even after either bishop captures the rook, black will be up a knight, and that's a sufficient material advantage for white to resign. A very interesting game, a very interesting battle between attack and defense from one of the greatest masters at it, Anatoly Karpov. And now let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. This composition was done by Richter in 1940. And it's one of those interesting situations when there are no pawns on the board and there are very limited number of pieces. And despite black having the material advantage, it is white who is looking to win the game. I suggest you take some time and try to figure out the important ideas about this position and the solution. Well, the first thing we can see is that if our knight could go to b6, that would be checkmate, or if the knight wouldn't be on e8, the same would happen if the white knight would get to c7. That's obviously one of the ideas. The other important idea to recognize here is that white has a pin over the knight on b7, and moreover, if the black rook would have to move, that would allow white to capture the knight on b7. Amazingly, the only solution is, to win the game, to give up our bishop. Bishop c7. That's kind of an amazing move. Now if black moves the rook, obviously white checkmates immediately. So black can only move the knight. First, let's check out what happens if black simply accepts that. And this is a check, moreover. Isn't this crazy? Well, it seems so, but in reality, it does the job. King b6, attacking the knight. Now if the black rook moves away, then bishop takes knight, check, followed by knight c6, checkmate. Knight moves away, and now, quite amazing, but white makes a simple move, knight a6, and black is in zugzwang. Whichever black piece moves, white checkmates on the next move. Quite brilliant, isn't it? Just to go back to see the other variation, after bishop c7, what happens if black ignores that and says, okay, take my rook. If bishop takes rook, king takes, even white takes the second knight, bishop and knight does not win against the knight. Well, white wouldn't want to do that. White will simply play bishop c6, kind of cutting out the knight, but the knight still can go there, trying to rescue the other knight from the pin. If now bishop takes knight, then knight c5 check and bishop is gone. Of course, white doesn't want that knight. White plays bishop d6. Now if the rook moves, again with checkmate, so the knight has to make a move, knight f6, knight d5. Now the checkmate threats I mentioned in the beginning are coming to life. Knight captures, bishop captures, and black is in zugzwang again. Rook moves, bishop takes knight, checkmate. What a beautiful composition. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this puzzle as well as learned a bit about defense. Thank you so much. So long until next time.